right, folks. So we're looking at Matthew chapter 22, about halfway through that chapter, 23. Chapter 22, verse 23. And here we have the Sadducees. This is still Yeshua being in Jerusalem for the Passover, which is coming right up, and he's being examined by the Sadducees and the scribes and the Pharisees, asking him questions. They're inspecting the lamb to see if he is a worthy lamb. And so the Sadducees come up with this ridiculous question in verse 23 of Matthew 22. The same day, Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him, "Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and father children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. The second did the same, and the third down to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they had all married her." Yeshua answered them, "You are deceived, because you don't know the scriptures, or the power of Elohim. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like messengers in heaven. Now, as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by Elohim? I am the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob. He is not the Elohim of the dead, but of the living." When the crowds heard this, they were amazed at his teaching. Now when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they assembled together. And one of them, an expert at the Torah, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the Torah is the greatest?" And Yeshua said to him, "Love Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul, and with your all. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the Torah and the prophets depend upon these 2 commandments." And while the Pharisees were assembled, Yeshua asked them a question. "What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he?" And they said, "The son of David." And he said to them, "How then does David, by the Spirit, call him Adonai, saying, 'Yehovah said to my master, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet'? If David then calls him master, how can he be his son?" No one was able to answer him a word, and from that day on, no one dared to question him any longer. I think this is hilarious. It's good stuff. Good stuff. So I have a question for you. When Yeshua, when they ask him this kind of ridiculous question about a man having a wife and, he dies, and it's almost like the phraseology here makes it sound like, he left her as an inheritance to his brother. Yeah. Are we familiar with the Levirate laws of Leviticus and how that actually works? That's what you're supposed to do if you have a brother, who dies and he's childless. That the brother is supposed to marry that widow and have children with her and the name of the brother, so that his lineage can carry on. And if he does not, does anyone remember what happens if he decides, I ain't doing that?
Next guy, the closest relative, gets a chance.
Well, yeah, that's true. That the kinsman redeemer down the line would have an opportunity, just like with Naomi and Ruth, absolutely. And then now the Torah says that if he says I'm not going to do it, then she's supposed to take off his shoe and spit in his face in front of the gate of the city, and say that he'll be called the one who had his shoe removed. So this is a great disgrace because he was not willing to do, what was right by his brother. Now, I don't proclaim that this would be a good idea today, I don't think that. But that's the way it was. I wouldn't say that it was necessarily cultural, but the Torah said it. I don't know that I would do that. But why would he say to them, you are deceived because you don't know the scriptures? Regarding, whose wife is she in the resurrection? To what scriptures would he be referring to where we would learn that in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage? Where is this discussed?
I forgot where I read that. But it was where they don't get married and there's no sex.
Yeah, where? I've never read that.
I have, I just can't remember where.
Does anyone know anything about that? I'm not saying that I do, because I cannot, for the life of me, figure out what is he talking about. He doesn't clarify himself. He just says you are ignorant because you don't know the scriptures or the power of God, because they are not given in marriage. I'm like, where is he talking about? I'm not familiar with that.
Is it missing scripture that we're still...
I don't know whether it could be that, or it's more likely that he's speaking in a mystical sense from like some deeper meaning in the Torah, which is not revealed, generally speaking. I don't know.
There are certain things, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh,
It
sure.
talks a little bit about the it's not in
Yeah.
the Bible that you can buy over the counter.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose, I don't even know that there's anything like in the book of Enoch. I've read a certain amount of the book of Enoch, but I don't remember anything in there about that.
Just like in Enoch, that's what the 200 watchers that came down. They were males. They were men. Married. Women were beautiful, so they
Oh, yeah.
wanted to take them as wives. Well, if they were women in heaven for them to marry, they wouldn't be looking at the earthly woman, would they? I mean,
Yeah.
there's
Maybe that's what
it's
he's talking
speculation
about.
on my part.
No, I totally
I don't
understand.
know.
But yeah, I was just wondering if anybody had any insight, because he's saying, you don't know what you're talking about because you don't know the scriptures. And I'm like, what scriptures are you talking about? Tracy?
I don't know either. It's just that I'm sure he's speaking like you said, like a spiritual perspective, because clearly these guys know the scriptures,
Yeah.
but they don't know the scriptures, the
Right.
Torah spirit. So
Right.
they must not have that spiritual understanding.
Yeah.
Also, I think there's a clue in what he's saying. Have you not heard that it's spoken to you by God saying, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not that I was.
Right.
That
Right.
they are living.
Right.
So, I don't know. That's
Yeah, the ancestors are living. I think that's a powerful scripture, a powerful interpretation, And I think it's important, in case you don't know, that the Sadducees do not believe in the Bible. They only believe in the first 5 books. They do not believe in the Psalms, the Proverbs, the Song of Solomon, the prophets. They do not consider that the Bible. The Zedekim only believe in the first 5 books, and they are hyper-literalists. Therefore, they don't believe in the resurrection, because if you're reading the Torah from a hyper-literal perspective, where in the Torah does it say that there's a resurrection? No, it doesn't. It doesn't explicitly say that, but there are so many allusions to it but they are hyper-literalists. Angela?
Contrasting the physical with the spiritual, when he created the world, the physical things like the animals and the people, he said, be fruitful and multiply, and that was physical recreating. He wanted us to multiply those physical things. But multiplication on a spiritual level does not happen by having sex and then having a baby. And so I think they're being so literal and so physical about this whole getting married, have sex, have a baby. He's almost, that it's almost like, okay, that's physical multiplication. Spiritual multiplication, you're not getting. Mm-hmm. You're not getting that physical thing is a picture of something much bigger.
I agree, and also later on, I don't know if we will get there today, but he talks about it again, the contrast of physicality and non-physicality.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems to be a recurring theme in Matthew, is this physical versus
absolutely.
spiritual.
Yeah, we've noticed that, repeatedly, absolutely. And I just, like Tracy said, I love his response, I am not the God of the dead. It doesn't, like you said, I am not the God I was the God of your ancestors. I am the God of your ancestors. They are alive. You can't see them. They're not here right now, but they are alive. I think that's a powerful insight. Now, talking about what is the greatest commandment in the Torah, notice that he doesn't quote any of the 10 Commandments. It's kind of interesting. Do you notice what he is quoting?
Torah.
Deuteronomy, I believe.
Deuteronomy and Leviticus. He's quoting the Shema. He's quoting the Shema and Leviticus. You can look that up. Make a note to yourself. That's Deuteronomy 6:4 and Leviticus 19:18 was where he's taken two sections. And the Shema, I know you all know the Shema. That's thank you, Robert, if you would, yeah. That's a fabulous scripture. I mean, do you guys ever, is that something that you have adopted, for saying? I know that the Hebrews, basically quote the Shema as part of their prayers 3 times a day. I think it's an incredibly powerful scripture, and I'd like us to just take a look at it really quick. For maybe some of you who haven't really familiarized yourself with it. If you look at Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4, this is the greatest commandment in the Torah.
Yeah.
And it is
Greatest.
awesome. Hear, O Israel, Yehovah our Elohim is one. And you shall love Yehovah your Elohim with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with everything that you have, or all of your being. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall diligently teach them to your sons, and you shall speak of them when you sit in your house, and as you walk on the way, and when you are lying down, and when you are rising up. And you shall bind them for a sign on your hand, and they shall be like frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So this is the greatest commandment of the Torah. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength.
So that covers everything.
That really does. Well, that part of it, he says, it is most important to love your God. But he says he's not going to be trapped into a box that says what's the greatest commandment. He says I've got another one which is just as important, is equally as important, and that is to love your neighbor as yourself, because the two go together perfectly. Tracy?
Also, too, it's important to take note of, in Mark, when he answers this question, he says the greatest command is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." So he actually is quoting it.
A little more verbatim.
And he does this a lot, where he won't say the whole thing because you know it, and you know what comes next. What words? These words, the
Right.
Torah.
Right.
But what's important about this first and greatest command is that it begins with the word "hear," and that word "hear," Shema, means to listen, hear intelligently, understand, obey, and proclaim. All of those things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're hearing His word and
Yep.
doing it, this is how you love the Lord, by keeping His commandments. So if you're not doing that, how can you claim to love Him if you're not doing what He says? Hearing, keeping, doing, and proclaiming His word.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Hello, Timotheus.
I don't recall the reference, but there's one place where Christ said, if you don't love your brother or your neighbor, how can you love God who you can't see?
Yeah.
If you don't love your neighbor who you can see.
Right.
So even though loving your neighbor is number 2, if you don't do number 2, then it's impossible to do number 1.
Right.
True. Absolutely.
Which is love God.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think. That sounds right.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I'm just gonna read to you. You can put it in your notes if you want, or take a look at it. At Leviticus 19, starting in I'll just back up a little bit at 15. It says, "You shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. You shall not respect the face of the poor, nor favor the face of the rich. But in righteousness you must judge your neighbor. You shall not go about as a slanderer among your people. You shall not stand up against the blood of your neighbor. I am Yehovah. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall certainly reprove your neighbor and not allow sin on him. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yehovah. Leviticus 19:18. So that's interesting where he's quoting from and what he's quoting to teach us what is the heart of all the commandments of God. I mean, that's if you had to put it in a nutshell, that's what it is, a nutshell. Now, that doesn't mean that that's all of it, because unfortunately, many of us will take that and say, well, that's really simple. I mean, that's so simple that it is.
Not to do it though.
It is simple, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah.
People make the mistake too of thinking, oh, I just have to love, but then they think that that's my definition of love. What is
That is
God's
the biggest.
definition of
That
love?
is the biggest problem,
Right.
because you know, those of you who are in relationships know that your definition of love is really irrelevant to your spouse, right? It is what their definition of love is that matters. So, yeah, if we're kind of getting a little wrapped around the axle thinking that we know what God wants, but we don't, how can you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength if you don't even know what he wants? You can't. How can you love your neighbor if you don't know if you're only concerned about what you want and you haven't even given any thought to what your neighbor wants? How can you love your neighbor? You can't. You won't. You will not fulfill these two commandments if you're not thinking outside of yourself. You know that all types of evil come from selfishness. It's the root of lots of stuff. So we got to focus on not just what is he saying here, but break open that nutshell and see what's inside. How do you love the Lord your God with all your heart? How do you love your neighbor as yourself? Tracy.
The Messiah tells us in John 14, he who loves me keeps my words, and the words which you hear are not mine, but the Father's who sent me. That's
right.
Right back to the first commandment where it says that all these words in this Torah shall be written in your hearts and your minds. And that's the new covenant in Jeremiah 31. In those days, and at that time, I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. I'll write my Torah in their hearts and in their minds. I'll be their people. They will know me because that word is in there.
Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to have been since the beginning. But
That's
through
right.
Messiah and through his sacrifice, we are able to be coming back into that covenant.
That's right. That's right. It's reconciliation. It's the best way to look at it. Excellent insights. Why is Yeshua testing their understanding of who the Messiah is? I mean, he decides he's going to bust out a question on them, and it's a pretty good one. I thought that was a pretty good question that he asks them. Whose son is David? Now, of course, everybody knows that. Who is the Messiah? Whose son is he? Well, it's David's. It's the son of David. Everybody knows that. But then he puts out, Psalm 110 on him and says, well, then riddle me this, Batman. How can David say, prophesying of the Messiah, call him Lord if he's his son? And if you read it in Hebrew, it's real clear that there's three people engaged in this sentence here. You got David saying to the Messiah, calling him Lord, and then referring to Adonai, the Father, all in the same sentence. He's asking him, how do you explain that? They don't have any clue. Because they didn't really have a perception, and still obviously to this day don't, many of them, that the Messiah is a divine being. That's a really hard thing for them to wrap their minds around. And he stumps them, and they don't even want to ask him any questions anymore. That'll happen.
It's almost the same as what we have now. Where we tend to think more and more this earthly world here, and what can I do, and what is my opinion, and my opinion becomes truth. And it's the same what they had back then.
Yeah.
They just saw everything what they received as the word. How do I practice that on the physical plane? He answered them through the question for, okay, you don't even understand the question because you cannot think in the next level, which is up there.
Yeah. Think is breaking away from the physical and getting to the spiritual. Yeah, absolutely. Tracy?
And we can see how he is both son of David and son of God. Through the lineage of Mary, son of David. Through the seed in Mary, son of God. And that's the same way we are called sons of God. The seed is the word, and that word in us makes us sons God.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's their inability to see in the spirit. They can only see this
Yeah.
flesh.
And that's going to come out really, really clearly in this next sections here, where he's really getting after him about spiritual blindness. Spiritual blindness is a big root of a lot of this. And in fact, I think that's an excellent time for us to go ahead and go forward just a little bit. This next section obviously is a doozy. Did Matthew 23, 1 through 13. Let's take a look at this. This one ought to engage us in some lively discussion. So then Yeshua said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The experts in the Torah and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, pay attention to what they tell you and do it. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy loads, hard to carry, and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing even to lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds to be seen by people, for they make their phylacteries wide and their tassels long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues and elaborate greetings in the marketplaces and to have people call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. But woe to you, experts in the Torah, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! You keep locking people out of the kingdom of heaven, for you neither enter nor permit those trying to enter to go in." So this is a really challenging section of Scripture because we don't understand, and I know that there are some theories out there to try to explain this, why it is that Yeshua would say to the crowds and his disciples, essentially, pay attention to what the experts in the Torah and the Pharisees are telling you. Do what they do. Listen to what they tell you to do and do it, but don't do what they do. Now that's a challenging one, and I know that there are some interpretations which say, well, that's a mistranslation. And that certainly is a possibility, because I know that there are, some say 9, some say 11 different extant versions of a Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, which says, and I know that there's, if you're looking at the, how to conjugate these pronouns in Hebrew, the difference between shomer and shomru is nil. There's a tiny little fragment of a letter which will change this from saying whatever they tell you, do it, to whatever he tells you, do it, referring to Moses. Now, unfortunately, of the 11 versions of that scripture in Matthew, Hebrew Matthew, that are still extant, only 4 of them are translated he, referring to Moses. The other 7 are translated as they. So you can take your pick. I don't know whether some of the translations got it right and translate it as therefore whatever he tells you, that is Moses, or whether, because it doesn't make sense any other way, frankly. Why would he say to them, whatever the scribes and Pharisees tell you to do, do it? He certainly didn't do what they told him to do. He voided their prescriptions many times, just in the book of Matthew. So it would be rather hypocritical for him to say, hey, whatever they tell you to do, do it. But then he doesn't. When they say you can't pluck heads of grain on the Sabbath, when you can't heal on the Sabbath, don't carry your mat on the Sabbath. I mean, there's all kinds of examples you can come up with where he went directly against their teachings. And so that may be an entirely valid theory to say someone mistranslated that. It is not do what they say, it's do what he says. Jerry, did you want to comment
I was
on
going
that?
to say the same thing you did. I think the they should be a he, and according to Michael Rood in his book here.
Yeah. Yeah, I know
Pretty
that
good
was the
write-up on
first time that I had heard that was from Michael Rood, translating that.
Nehemiah Gordon's got a whole
Yeah.
teaching on it for 2
Right.
hours.
Right. And so that is a totally valid, could be a totally valid argument. All I'm saying is, of the 11 extant versions of that, only 4 of them have it translated as he. The others have they. Could be a mistranslation. I'm not sure. Ani?
Yeah, and earlier in Matthew, he criticizes them to teach the traditions
Right.
of man and the statutes of man, so that would be a contradiction too.
Right.
And like you said as well, they taught the oral Torah, they taught the traditions of man. They said, don't you know you have to wash your hands? And Yeshua said, well, that's not what the Torah says. So apparently they are not teaching
Right.
the right things.
And he calls them, Torahlessness. He calls them anomia, that Greek word anomia, without Torah. He's blaming these guys of not doing the Torah at all.
He enjoyed it riling them up.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
washing
oh,
your
yeah.
hands wasn't like this. It was taking a pitcher of water.
Yeah, pouring it over one
pouring it over
hand
your
3
hand.
times.
It was a
yeah.
ritual. It had nothing to do with it.
And you know
washing
what?
your
And
hands.
frankly, I think we might bear in mind that, traditions are not bad. There's not a problem with a tradition. I mean, is it a good thing to wash your hands? I think it's a good thing to wash your hands before eating. That's fine. I think in fact, if you look at in history, when the Black Death was sweeping Europe and killed 1/3 of the population of the planet, many Jews sailed right through that plague. Now, of course, they were hounded and killed because the people thought that they were laying a curse on them, and somehow it's not affecting you, but it's affecting us. It must be your fault. But scientists have discovered that it's really because the Jews were fairly cleanly people. They washed their hands before they ate, and they had a ritual mikvah, a ritual bath. Every time that they were fairly clean people.
They didn't know about germs and stuff.
They did, yeah.
Did the society by and large follow the food laws back then? So they were eating things like that.
Yeah, they were eating things that were unclean, and certain parts of Europe still have their sewers in the gutter, so it's fairly unclean. But is a tradition like that a bad thing? No, not necessarily. Just because it's a tradition doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means A, you can't elevate it to the level of a commandment.
When it's a
And B,
sin,
you certainly can't set aside some of the commandments of God in preference to your own traditions, which is certainly these people are guilty of. But it seems clear to me that this translation here, there's something wrong, because Yeshua cannot be telling us follow what the experts in the Torah and the Pharisees tell you to do. And I think if you go to any synagogue today, and you guys know this because you've gone through the Torah cycle, in a synagogue, every week, to this day, they are still teaching Moses. They'll teach you Moses. They're going to have some insights and some commentary from the Talmud and from their traditions of their elders going back for a long time, and that's fine. But they are teaching the Torah. They are teaching Moses still to this day. And so, like it says in Acts chapter 15, Moses is taught in every city, every Sabbath day. They're still doing that. So it makes sense to me that if you're going to a synagogue, you're going to hear Moses taught. And therefore, do what he says. Do what Moses says, not what the Pharisees say. That makes a lot more sense than this, what is most probably a mistranslation. Do you have any objections, Daryl? Comment?
Oh no, I thought it was funny the generalization that Yeshua made. I can't remember where, but he said, "You strain at a gnat."
Oh, that's coming right up.
You swallow a camel.
Yes. Yeah, that part is coming right up here.
Your point is all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're coming right to that here in this next section. But I think now he's talking about these heavy loads. You tie up heavy loads and put them on people, and you're not. But you know that he's talked about his own yoke and his own load, right? That was from previously in Matthew. You take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy. My yoke is easy. So I think what we can really, a fair conclusion, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would be a fair conclusion to make that the Messiah, Yeshua's interpretation of how to carry out the commandments of the Torah is much less stringent than the way that the Pharisees and the Sadducees had interpreted it. And you can,
5,000?
yeah, they added a lot of regulations. Absolutely. And you know what I want to point out to you? I want you to keep in mind that good intentions can go horribly wrong. If they really can. Because it's clear to me that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the rabbis of old built what you have heard of as fences around the Torah. Now, is that always a bad thing? No, it's not. It's not. You know, I mean, it's like there's a certain part on the top of my stove which is hot. It's just that little circle right on top there. But I will tell my children, don't go anywhere near that stove. I have just built a fence around the rule.
I think it's wrong because they are actually adding when they build a fence, because the fence is not the same thing. The fence is something close to the same thing, so they would in that case add something.
Yeah, it can get out of hand. I think we have to think about it in a balanced way because it can get out of hand. I mean, for your children, for example, I think that you would hopefully agree, maybe you don't, I don't know, to say, just stay away from the stove. You know, just to be safe, don't go near the stove. When in actuality, it's only the inside of the oven and the top part which will hurt them. But because they are young and they need a little more guidance, just steer clear of the stove. And maybe for someone who is young in Torah and is maybe learning things, maybe that's needed in some case. I'm not willing to necessarily say that building all fences is wrong, but if you build a fence and then you say this is the rule, we've got a problem because that's not the rule. I can see the good all I'm saying really is that I can see the good intention that is the usefulness in building a fence to protect you from not violating the commandment. However, when we elevate the fence to the commandment itself, and we don't later clarify for the mature and say, look, this is the commandment. The fence was there to guard you while you were young and ignorant and you didn't know what you were doing. But we really need to understand this is the commandment. That's not the commandment. But see, and I'm just saying, there does seem to be good intentions there, but good intentions can go horribly wrong, which it clearly did with these people and still does today when you've got all of these additional commandments that have been added and elevated to the point of, yeah, that's actually the commandment, but this is now a commandment as well. You can't do that. You can't say this is now the commandment or the boundary has been moved. This is now the commandment. You just can't do that.
Yeah, I think you are what you're doing a little bit with this fence. You're trying to help God. Like, well, the way God said, it's kind of really dangerous, or that doesn't do it quite yet because that would cause a lot of people to stumble, or maybe whatever, they come close to the stove, so they may as well hit the burning part or whatever. And it's like with the Ark of the Covenant, there is this story in the Old Testament where they were carrying it on a wagon and it was about to fall, and a guy jumped in and was trying kind of to help. And I think it's a little bit like this. We're thinking, okay, the commandments are not, we gotta help out with it. The way they are kind of not as good. We need to build something around it to make it really safe. And I hear it a lot, I learned about it a lot as it's really kind of an excuse, because they excuse a lot of the oral Torah, a lot of the man-made traditions. They excuse with the words, oh, that's because we're building a fence around it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally
Even with
understand.
the Sabbath, they added all these things, and they are like, yeah, we just want to make sure you really don't work. That's why we're adding all these burdens. And then Yeshua himself says they're adding all these burdens. And
Yeah. No, I totally understand. Keith, go to you next.
Yeah, you failed as a Pharisee. It's not don't go near the stove. It's don't go in the kitchen.
Yeah, well, the boundaries can keep getting moved, and you could end up starving to death because you can't go in the kitchen anymore. So you can definitely shoot yourself in the face here.
I think what worries me is if you tell them that they will burn their hand if they put it on top of the stove, and it's only within those circles where they'll actually burn their hand. But they'll stick their hand up there and think that you're a liar because they didn't burn their hand. So I'd rather just explain it the way it is.
Yeah, I think that's always honesty, the truth, and that's true. Like I said, it depends on how old they are, but the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth is the best policy. I think maybe some arrogance would be at play here, with the rabbis thinking, well, you know what, you're too stupid. You know what? It's a lot like liberalism in our country. You're too stupid. You need more rules, right? I think it's a very fair analogy. Tracy?
When Yahweh placed Adam in the garden, he put a hedge around him. He placed him in this protected area. These parables about the vineyard, and Israel, we know Israel's the vineyard. He puts a hedge around it.
Yeah.
His word is this hedge.
Mm-hmm.
His Torah is the protection. That word shamar means means to keep and protect.
Right.
And that means to hedge about, as with thorns.
Right.
So if we are not trusting in that hedge, we're not trusting in God.
Right.
And we're making it our own hedges because we don't trust in his word. So then we got to call out our Egyptian neighbors and say, help me, because this word is not good enough.
Right.
So I think that's getting into the same areas with adding and subtracting from the Torah.
Sure. Excellent insight. Excellent. You can look at, I put just a couple of references here. You can see in Acts chapter 15, verses 7 through 11, where Peter, when they were starting to argue about these fences around the Torah, that Peter says to the Sanhedrin, brothers, why do you try to place this yoke upon the Gentiles that neither us nor our fathers have ever been able to bear? And some of these in Matthew 11 and Jeremiah 6. So if you want to just kind of note those things and maybe take a look at that. So definitely keeping in mind that no, we don't want to get ourselves wrapped around the axle on a bunch of stuff. We've got plenty to do in the Torah. We don't need a bunch of extra commandments. That's definitely true. I'm just saying, sometimes it's arrogance, sometimes it's with good intentions, and sometimes it's downright evil to just try to replace it. Make up something new that you think is better, that you think makes more sense. I totally get that. So what would you say regarding this teaching of saying, hey, don't call anybody father or rabbi or teacher? Is that to be taken literally, or is there a deeper principle in is that literal, or is that a metaphor? Why would you say that?
Well, you have a physical father, but I think we have to understand the whole paragraph and also the whole chapter 23. He is going to them. Before that, he had, he went on the mount, the Sermon of the Mount, and say everything from how to live, how to get close to God, and then later on he goes from that mount with basically representation of the New Jerusalem. Now he goes later on to the Pharisees and say, not one stone will be left intact. And he goes to them saying, okay, the way you guys take everything is just in one spiritual way. You just make it into these ridiculous, burdensome rules, and you don't understand the whole Torah.
Right.
But I think that you cannot take even father. He is not even talking about your physical father, of course, but we have only one true father because he created us from scratch.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, he's talking to I think that he's referring to his disciples here when he's saying, you are not to be called rabbi. And frankly, they may have had people call them rabbi, and I'm sure that would have been fine. But I think that what he's teaching them here is, you are not to go out and make disciples for yourselves, to become a rabbi yourself, to try to form your own disciples. We got, Peter and his group of disciples, and James and his group of disciples. No. That's not to be taken literally. Yes, I'm sure that, once they get a little older, they get some wisdom, they've been hanging around with Messiah, they're going to be incredibly wise and have a tremendous insights into the Torah and become great Torah scholars themselves, I'm sure. And I'm sure that people probably called them rabbi. Just a common phrase for a teacher or a master in that time. However, I think that the principle that Yeshua is teaching them is, don't make disciples for yourself, make disciples for me. Your job is to make disciples that follow me. You're promulgating my teachings, not your own. You're not forming your own school.
This is another method that he's using to glorify the Father in all things. So, like when someone said, "Good teacher," why do you call me good? And he is the good shepherd.
Sure.
So we know that word is used of him, but he's saying no one is good but the Father.
Right.
I think that same principle when he says don't judge, yet later he says judge righteously. He's not saying necessarily don't judge, but because it's probably better you don't, because you're going to be judged in the same way you judge. So better if you just don't do it.
Yeah, saying be really careful, because if you're gonna judge, you better judge with righteousness. Just like and it's kind of funny because when he just quoted Leviticus 19:18, the sentence right before that is judge with righteous judgment. So yeah, absolutely. There's the duality there. Ani.
I don't know if anyone said that yet, but I heard that the word rabbi doesn't mean teacher. It means exalted one.
Great one.
Great one. Yeah, that could be. Yeah, that sounds probably.
Teacher is Moria. And so
yeah.
I think it's about kind of don't worship man or don't follow like. I see that everywhere where people just follow ministry or they follow teacher and they don't study themselves too much anymore.
Well, and I think it's not for no reason that right after he said, don't be called great one, that he says, the one who greatest among you will be your servant. He repeats again about being humble. Because if you lift yourself up, God's going to make it his job to knock you down. If you lower yourself.
It's kind of the same as when he also is talking about you should hate your father, or you should hate he's talking about
the one who doesn't, put aside his father and his siblings and follow me. Yeah, right.
Do you think that's kind of the same in a way?
I would say it's similar. Yeah, I would say that, No, yeah, it's not literal. It's just, he was, again, talking about, because he had been talking to the rich young ruler at that point and saying, sell everything you got and follow me if you're that serious. If you're going to take it that seriously, this is what it takes. You got to get rid of every distraction in your life, period. And therefore, I tell you, the one who is not willing to despise father, mother, children, daughters, is not worthy to follow me and be called my disciple. And so, again, I think that Ane is absolutely correct, talking about these, he's saying don't try to bring glory to yourself by, saying you're a rabbi. If people call you a rabbi, that's fine. They're honoring you. But don't you seek after that. Don't try to make your own school. Don't try to build a following for yourself. Don't become a mega church preacher, I think is what he's talking about.
And we've even been there in Israel where the people, they pilgrim. There's like pilgrimages to these graves from these rabbis.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's really like kind of, they worship, pretty much worship there.
Sure.
They go there and then
It's very similar to like a veneration of a saint in Catholicism.
They are like kind of like saints.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. What's that?
So true.
Yeah, absolutely. Worshiping the Pope and saints and this and that. Absolutely. Worshiping Mary and yeah. So what do you think about this thing that he accuses them of locking people out of the kingdom of heaven? Because they're not willing to enter and they're not willing to permit those trying to enter to go in. How would they be doing that?
Lying to them.
How would they be doing that?
False
What was that, Jerry?
Call them a false prophet telling them lies instead of the truth.
Okay, yeah, excellent point. Keith?
Well, the misguidance that they've led them up to about all this Takanot and the Masim and all the things they have them following, and they're the blind leading the blind, and so those people are distracted with all these things that aren't even in the Torah
Right.
that they're doing,
Right.
and their burdens on them. That's another yoke. So yeah, they're not.
So how would that keep you out of the kingdom of heaven, and your teaching keep others out of the kingdom? Tracy?
One idea is that Messiah is the door. He is the door to the kingdom. And these people don't believe in him, so they're not going in, because they're not going through him, and they're not allowing others to go in either if they're teaching them he's not.
Yes, and I know that one of your favorite metaphors is that he is the door and he is the word.
Right.
And if
the
they
word
are
Devar is the Hebrew letters,
Right.
Dalet, which is a door, the
And
Vav,
he-
which is a house, the
and
Resh,
he
which is a
repeatedly is telling them, you don't follow God. You set aside the commandments of God all the time. You got your own set of rules. You've made up your own religion that has very little to do. It has some things in common, but you know what? You can say that about any religion in the world if you want. I know that you probably know some Mormons. They've got a certain amount of truth in their religion. The Jehovah's Witnesses have a certain amount of truth in their religion. God forbid, even the Muslims have a certain amount of truth in their religion. The Hindus have a certain amount of truth in their religion. They all have some things in common.
So do pagans.
So do pagans. That is true. There are people who don't believe in God at all who are good people. They might love their neighbor, you know. So there's a lot of similarity there, but that doesn't mean it's the truth. That doesn't mean it's the truth. That means, well, you know that the devil is a thief, right? And that he's a liar, and that his greatest deception is taking something and twisting it just a little bit. A lot of people get tripped up with things that look close.
And replace it with something else.
Absolutely.
So the point of that is that you never arrive at the door.
Right. That you'll never arrive at the door because
There are
you...
a million ways for you to go. I was talking to a Hindu guy about that very issue, and he believed there always are. There's all these roads, and they all lead to
Sure.
the same God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. So in the sense that they are leading people away from the door, you know, they're going around the door, to the left of the door, you know, going around behind the door. And I think that those couple of chapters in the book of John talking about how he is the door and the sheepfold, and that's excellent insight onto that. So absolutely, they are preventing people from entering the kingdom of heaven. And I think, remember that we are not talking about heaven and hell here. Because we're talking, because the kingdom of heaven is now. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. There are people, remember the whores and the prostitutes and the tax collectors from last week are entering ahead of you. They are living the kingdom life now by being filled with the correct path, on the right path, walking in the right way. They got the truth now. They've been set free of all of the lies and the deceptions, and they're walking straight into the door of the kingdom right then and there. Not talking about heaven and hell necessarily. Different levels. I'm going to move forward just a little bit. I know we're going to wrap it up here in just a few. This is the part of the last section here. These are the woes. And I would ask that you might look into this in your weekly study to compare these 7 woes compared to the 7 parables that were taught in the parables of the kingdom. That's an interesting insight.
And the Beatitudes.
The 7
The Beatitudes, yeah.
Beatitudes. You said the parables.
Well, sorry,
Did
yeah.
you mean to say parables?
Yeah, no, I meant to say the Beatitudes. So if you compare the Beatitude statements to these woes, they tie together very interestingly.
No, before we go in those,
Yeah.
the funny part is when you do research, some people say there are 7, some people say there are 8, and some say there are 9.
Yeah?
Have you ever seen that? It's so weird, depending on how you take it. If you verbatim take the word woe, yes, you got only 7, but a lot of people say there are actually 8 or 9.
That's interesting.
I don't know if you have any
I
have
haven't
8 woes.
I haven't counted them.
In my interlinear, I have 8 woes marked.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's
Well.
just the word woe. I don't.
Yeah. Well, let's read it. See what we think. Woe to you, experts in the Torah, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! You crossed land and sea to make one convert, and when you get one, you make him twice as much a child of Gehenna as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple is bound by nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple is bound by the oath. Blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? And whoever swears by the altar is bound by nothing, but if anyone swears by the gift on it, he is bound by the oath. You are blind, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and the one who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of Elohim and the one who sits on it. Woe to you, experts in the Torah, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! You give 1/10 of mint, dill, and cumin, yet you neglect what is more important in the Torah: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have done these things without neglecting the others. Blind guides, you strain out a gnat, yet swallow a camel. Woe to you, experts in the Torah, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. That's actually Torahlessness. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup so that the outside may become clean too. Woe to you, experts in the Torah, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs that look beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of the bones of the dead and of everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you look righteous to people, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and Torahlessness. Woe to you, experts in the Torah, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous, and you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have participated with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. By saying this, you testify against yourselves that you are descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your ancestors, you snakes, you offspring of vipers. How will you escape being condemned to Gehenna? Powerful, powerful stuff here. Now, verse 15, woe to you guys because you crossed land and sea to make a convert. What is that referring to? Were the Jews big missionaries? Are they going out around the world spreading the?
Oh yeah, they went far and wide to get disciples. To each set, like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they all had their own.
But where were they going?
Just among the people everywhere that they could reach out to bring them in.
That is actually a common understanding. But I'll propose a theory from my own research into this. Jews have never been interested in proselytizing anyone who was not Jewish. And they still aren't.
Well, no, but these were sects within Judaism. I mean, they were completely separate.
Yeah, they're fighting amongst themselves.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think what he's actually talking about is that they go over land. Because remember that the Pharisees, where's their stronghold? Where is their influence the greatest? In the area of Jerusalem, in the area of Judea. And so they'll travel over land, mostly to the northern part of Samaria, where there's lots of Jews living, like where Jesus grew up, in Nazareth and Chorazin, and there's all these Jewish communities up north. And that's why sometimes when he's up there up north, you'll see him run into a Pharisee who's questioning him. They're out there proselytizing Jews to get them to convert to their way of thinking. And they're crossing the Sea of the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, in order to go to the Jewish communities on the other side or up north to proselytize among their own brethren, to get them to see things from their perspective. Jews have never been, and still to this day are not interested in converting Gentiles. Not at all. In fact, it's a common understanding that if you today were to go to a temple, Beth something down the road and say, hey, I want to convert to Judaism, they'll tell you no. They'll say no, you don't want to do that, go away. And then if you go back again and you say, no, I'm serious, I want to convert to Judaism, no, you don't. Go away.
If you marry somebody who's Jewish,
that's one
you're
way.
expected to-
But you actually have to persist and go back 3-4 times in order to and tell them, no, I am dead serious. I want to convert to Judaism. That they will finally say, okay, all right, let's talk. But that's how they do. They are not interested in proselytizing, and they are not interested in converting Gentiles at all. They are trying to convert each other to each other's way of thinking. And it's still that way today.
So they think the Gentiles are irretrievable.
Well, yeah, they're unredeemed, they're heathen, they're dogs, and there's no sense in going to talk to these people. They have no interest.
And then the Gentiles go to them and try to convince them that Jesus is the Messiah.
That's
but
right,
They're
and
not following Torah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
The
it's
devil's got it going, doesn't he?
yeah, absolutely. He's got them pitted against each other very well. It's all working out just according to his plan.
My experience with the Jews is I thought they would think we're heathens, and we don't. You go to the Catholic churches out there in Jerusalem, specifically the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I look at it as extremely pagan and evil. But I thought that they would look at the same thing, but from the rabbis I've talked to and shared that with, they don't see it that way. And maybe they do in general, I don't know, but from my experience, they believe, the ones I've talked to, that that's just your path. We're Jewish, and this is our path. The commandments are for us, not for you. And so I always thought the same thing, but I didn't get that from them.
Yeah. I think it really depends on what sect of Judaism, too, because I know that the Hasidim, these people who are really strict Orthodox, they have more of that attitude. Whereas like conservative and Reformed Judaism, those guys are very liberal in their religion. It's kind of because I've been talking to this rabbi who works where I work, and he's what you would consider a Reformed rabbi, and those are like people who are born in America and go to church on Easter and Christmas and say I'm a Christian because I was born in America. I'm Jewish because I celebrate the Passover and because I go to temple once in a while, and I had a bar mitzvah when I was 13. That makes me Jewish. That's pretty much the extent of their religion. But that's really similar with Catholics and Christians too. They just think I'm Christian because I was born in America and I go to church once in a while. And those people, I think you'll find a little bit more broad. Just like maybe they're a little more open to conversions and seeing things like you have suggested. It's just, that's your path. Are you guys familiar with First Fruits of Zion? You heard about this ministry? The First Fruits of Zion? There's you've heard of the MJAA and the MJMS, there's like Messianic Judaism, like big organizations that have been around since the 70s or something, when Messianic Judaism or Hebrew roots kind of stuff started getting started. They've got they have a very interesting take on this Messianic, Hebrew roots type of stuff. They basically say, we believe that Messiah is the Messiah is Yeshua, and Gentiles come and join us, and we're all a happy family worshiping Yeshua. However, the Torah and keeping the Torah that's not for Gentiles. That's just for Jews. You guys don't have to do that. So they have actually got the same idea. That's like, and they're treating it from a different angle, though. They're like, we're Jews. The Torah was given to us. The Sabbath was given to us. You Gentiles, yeah, the Messiah is Yeshua, but you don't have to keep these commandments. In fact, you shouldn't. That's for us. And so there are Messianic Hebrews who are actually making these kind of distinctions. And those are the two major Messianic Hebrew roots kind of organizations that go way back. And they're causing problems for all kinds of people because they're mixing it up even from the other side. Which is,
on that point, I've also been told that the first 4 commandments, which are mainly to God, to love God, that those are for everyone, Gentiles and the Jews. So the last 6 are just for the Jews.
the other way around.
No, the Sabbath is for the Jews.
Yeah, but you said it the other
Oh, did I say it the wrong way? Yeah.
You
So,
said the first 4
Yeah,
are for
first
the
4.
Gentiles, but they are for the Jews.
yeah,
The
but
last 6 are for the Gentiles. That's what this lady said.
is that what the other said?
Yeah, there's also, what was that guy's name that we were talking about last week? Some other guy in the Messianic movement who's trying to make a distinction right at Exodus chapter 24. Matthew Nolan, who is trying to say, yeah, the Torah that you're supposed to keep is Exodus 19 to 24, but then after the golden calf incident, there's all these additional commandments. Those are the ones that have been done away with. I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't work because there's a whole bunch of commandments in there which are...
First and greatest command is in there.
Yeah, it's like that doesn't work at all. So people are trying to dice this stuff up every which way to try and basically get out of having to do something, it seems like. I don't know.
Ellen, what about Kabbalah? Are they Jews?
Many Jews practice Kabbalism, which is just a mystical form. You might call that mysticism, like a monk, who is in isolation and prays and maybe whips his back with a cat of 9 tails and tightens things around his thighs to cause himself pain so that he can focus more. Those are just Jewish mystics. That's like the Scientology of Judaism. Famous people, Madonna and stuff like that. So yeah, but that's like a Jewish mysticism kind of
You have to
thing.
be careful of that stuff too, because like you said, they have truth. Like if you ever look at some of their websites, they get into some of the gematria and the spiritual sides of the Torah, which some of it
Tremendously
might
valuable.
be
Yeah,
right on, but you
absolutely.
have to be careful delving into that
Right.
sort of thing.
And I totally agree. And I would say the same thing in regards to the Talmud and the Mishnah, because I have read, not a good portion of it, but I've read a bit. And I think that there's tremendous wisdom and insight in those writings about the Torah. And frankly, a lot of insight into the Torah about the Messiah, which lines up with our beliefs about Yeshua perfectly. But there's a lot of foolishness in there as well, just downright foolishness. The difference is, if you don't know the truth, you could get confused. If you don't know what the Torah says and you're relying on somebody else to teach you oral Torah or something that's maybe supposed to be Torah but isn't, yeah, you get yourself in all kinds of trouble. But there is tremendous wisdom in there and there's tremendous foolishness in there. Just like a Christian commentary, C.H. Spurgeon, Louis Schaeffer, there are tremendous Christian scholars who have E.W. Bollinger. There are just amazing Christian scholars who have wonderful and amazing insights into the New Testament and the teachings of Messiah. But there's some foolishness in there as well. That's why we try not to place our hope and trust in a man or in following a man or a certain ministry, stuff like that. Note the emphasis where the values lie with these teachers versus where it lies with Yeshua in verses 16 to 22, talking about, what causes something to be sacred. That this section really, in my mind, has to do with spiritual blindness and dealing with the fact that they have got things just turned around on their head. It's like the sacrifice on the altar is, you swear by that. And he's saying, that's ridiculous. It's a dead animal. If you were to slaughter that dead animal in front of your own gate in your home and eat it, well, how's that different? Well, it's different because the altar is the thing that is sanctifying it and making it holy. It is most holy. If you've read right in the beginning of the book of Leviticus, it's talking about anything that touches that altar is holy. But they've got it completely backwards. They've got it completely physical. Just like Angela, points out, we're talking spiritual and physical dichotomy going on here in the book of Matthew repeatedly. They are caught up on the physical thing, the physical aspect of things, swearing by the gold in the temple instead of what's, the gold is just the material object. It is sanctified by the temple itself. They've got things just turned around. They are having trouble seeing the spiritual value, the spiritual impact of these things. They're only looking at the physical side, and they are spiritually blind. And I'm sure that this stuff just went right over their heads. They just didn't get
it. I
it.
think that goes over a lot of people's heads today too, even among the Torah observant, because they're seeing it from an external perspective. They're seeing it from works rather than from the Torah written on the heart that produces the fruit. The seed in me is producing these works. It's not me doing the works. And then from a backwards perspective, I think if you're looking at it that way, I think that's like the flesh.
I think you're right, and I think that this spiritual blindness in regards to the Torah can come from both directions. Where someone who is becoming Torah observant is only seeing it from a physical perspective. But then there's the Christian who says the Torah is not valid. They're also seeing it from a physical perspective.
And usually the Christians will look at those of us who are trying to pursue Torah saying you're trying to earn your righteousness, and that's not what we're doing.
Well, it's because they're looking at it from a physical perspective.
Right.
So both camps are looking at the Torah and the value of the Torah from a purely physical perspective.
Even Paul says it is spiritual.
Torah is spiritual, yes.
Yeah, this is really, the Pharisees are the forefathers of the rabbis of modern day Judaism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what they did is they were converting people to their religion. And I see here also that the laws that they establish are kind of close to the truth, but a little bit different. You don't swear by the altar, you swear by the animal on the altar or something like that. So it's
Right.
very close.
Right.
And we've been on a path where we have been questioning a lot of things because we still inherit from Judaism lies, from Christianity lies, where we just follow certain things and rules and we think they are biblical, but they are not. And when we really go back to Scripture, we go back to Moses, and that's what Yeshua says here. He's our teacher, and not those leaders, those religious leaders that put themselves in those positions.
Yeah, absolutely. Angela?
When they swear and they say on the animal, not the altar, when you swear and you really want to mean something, it's the thing of value to you that you pick to
True.
make your swear mean that much more. And so the things that they're swearing on reveal where their value is,
Right.
and it's not in the spiritual.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent insight. What you're swearing by really does reveal what's in your heart. That's an excellent insight. There's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of stuff here that's really insightful, and we don't have a lot of time to go into it. But like I said, I would recommend that you look at and compare the Beatitudes to these 7, 8, 6, 9 aspects of spiritual blindness, and you'll see some very interesting things. And I just have one additional slide here, and we'll finish up with chapter 23, and then next week is the very interesting stuff in Matthew 24, which is all the prophecies about the future, which I think you'll find absolutely fascinating.
Are we going to talk any more about these woes next week? Or?
We may, yes. I feel like we probably should just a little bit, because there's
a
just...
couple of pretty cool things in these next
Yeah,
week.
there's so much, and I think we have just a couple of minutes I'll talk about here, and if you want to throw out a couple of things, it's fine. We got started a little bit later tonight, and that's okay. Matthew 23, 34 through 39 says, "For this reason I am sending," for what reason? For what we just, for all these woes, and because they were sons of Gehenna. Okay, so keep that in mind. For this reason, I am sending you prophets and wise men and experts in the Torah, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town, so that on you will come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. I tell you the truth, this generation will be held responsible for all these things. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you would have none of it. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me from now on until you say, Blessed is the one who comes in the name of Yeshua. Powerful, powerful stuff. And this leads us right into chapter 24, talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the murder of millions of Jews and the desecration of the temple and all kinds of crazy stuff. What's really interesting to me is this generational judgment that is being passed down, and how it is possible that these people can be held responsible for the righteous blood of all of these innocents. On this generation will become responsible for the blood of Abel. That's the first guy murdered in the Bible. And frankly, and here's the other thing, is Zechariah, the son of Berechiah? Who in the heck is that? That's not in the Torah. Now, Michael Rood has this theory that is actually Zechariah. It was a mistranslation, is talking about John the Baptist's father. I'm not sure where he got that exactly. I'd have to look into that a little bit more. But that's kind of weird because the Torah doesn't talk about Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, at all. Don't know who that is.
I always thought it was him. I never realized.
Yeah, didn't he get indeed killed in the temple?
You mean Zechariah, the prophet? Well, he was not the son of Berechiah.
John the Baptist's father?
Oh, John the Baptist's father, his father was not called Zechariah.
I thought so. Zacharias.
What? John the Baptist's father was Zechariah.
Yeah, it is.
Was it Zechariah?
Yeah.
Are you sure about that?
And his mother was Elizabeth.
Well, I'm starting to doubt it now, but
The old lady
Who's
came out,
Zechariah?
yeah, Zechariah.
Yeah, Zacharias.
Is it Zechariah? Okay. Okay. Well, we don't know who this, but it doesn't tell us that he was the son of Berechiah, does it? I don't know. But now Michael Rood has a theory that it was John the Baptist's father who was killed between the temple and the altar, but there's nothing in the Torah about somebody being killed between the temple and the altar that I have.
I've been wrong before.
I have been wrong before.
Michael Rood, yeah.
Oh yeah, Michael Rood has been wrong before. That is true. So I don't know whether that could be John the Baptist's father. But I'm interested about this generational judgment, about how can these leaders be held responsible for all of the innocent blood of the righteous? Jerry.
Do you think maybe because they incited the riot that had Yeshua crucified, it just shows that their heart is absolutely no different than the people's 4,000 years ago?
Think that he's speaking in spiritual terms and not literally. That is certainly possible. I actually put in my notes here to look at James chapter 3, verse 1. I don't remember why I marked that, but I'm going to just take a look at it really quick. My brothers, do not be many teachers, but know that we will receive a greater judgment. That's interesting. I think I see where I was going with that.
Because these Pharisees are teaching, perhaps.
Yeah. That was the only thing that I came up with, but I thought it was an interesting correlation. He's like, not many of you should become teachers. Know that teachers incur a stricter judgment. And so these teachers are apparently incurring a very strict judgment, a very powerful judgment. It also occurs to me that that, he's talking about, remember when he talked about in the Torah how he blesses the descendants of those for 1,000 generations, for those who love him, but, he curses generations of those who hate him? It almost makes me think that these Pharisees and Sadducees hated God, that he's their enemy. They're his enemies. I don't know how you could see it otherwise, since Yeshua is calling them the offspring of a serpent.
Yeah. And he clearly says that he will never be with them as a people, the Pharisees, Sadducees, etc., till they really proclaim that the Messiah is the Son of God.
It's interesting is because just in the previous couple of chapters, when all the people were going up the hill to Jerusalem and they were saying, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yehovah," talking about the Messiah. And he says, "I'm not coming back. You will hear nothing from me until you say those words." That's coming. That time is coming. Tracy?
I think there's a much greater mystery going on here too, especially because he ties it all the way back to Abel. But like I talked about before, he's talking about here that you're like whitened graves, outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead man's bones. That word whitened graves, I think, ties back again to those white bricks that Babel was building with. The white brick Ezekiel used and wrote the name of Jerusalem on.
Yeah.
Lay a siege mount around her.
Yeah.
And that was all the way back to Cain, who went out to build cities. So that's a lot. But basically that's what he's talking about here. And he even goes into it, right into the Jerusalem, the one killing her prophets. That's why you're full of dead man's bones, because you kill everyone I send to you.
Yeah.
Back in verse 25, he says, "You cleanse the outside of the cup and the dish, but within you're full of robbery and excess." And there's a quote in Jeremiah 2:22 that says the same thing. You're washing it with soap and water, but inside you're full of death, basically. And what was going on in Jeremiah is Jerusalem was being taken over by Babylon. I think what happened is when Babylon breached Jerusalem became Babylon, in a sense. And so we see the same picture in Revelation 17:6, when the harlot, mystery Babylon, is sitting there with drunk on the blood of the saints.
Yeah.
Because there's some kind of connection here to Jerusalem and
Right.
the ones that are being sent to her.
Right.
And the reason why they hate God is the same reason why they hate Messiah, because he is the Word of God. They hated me before they hated you. That's talking all the way back from the beginning. They hated God's Word, which I am, and that's why they're going to hate you, because I'm in you.
And he is predicting that right here. He says, "I'm going to send you some prophets and some wise men and some experts in the Torah." Who are these? These are the disciples. Paul was an expert in the Torah. Paul was a Pharisee. So they're going to kill. So many of them were killed. Paul himself has made it his mission to go and drag people out of the synagogues and flog them and crucify them.
Jerusalem are made of white bricks. You
Yeah.
can see it to this day. And the same bricks are used to make tombs in Jerusalem as well.
Yeah, and they also, my understanding is that they would, lime wash all of the tombs out in the valley of the Kidron Valley, because when the pilgrims would come for Passover, I think that's part of the reason he was pointing out the tombs and whitewashed tombs, is because they whitewash those things to make them glow and be really bright at the time of the pilgrimage, so that the pilgrims would not step over the graves, because they believed that you become unclean, ritually unclean, by stepping over a grave. So they would whitewash them to make them really easy to see, like putting a neon sign on them, "Don't go here," you don't want to become unclean. I think that is where we stop until we pick up next time to look at some of these prophecies of the end in 24 and 25. And after that, he's going to be killed. We're coming right up to the end of the book here pretty quick. Does anyone have any additional insights or comments that they'd like to make before we wrap up here? Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your good insights and your good